大家早。Welcome to Taiwan. Welcome to Taipei Forum, Governor Huntsman, and my cordial welcome to you, Mrs. Huntsman and Gracie. 非常谢谢，非常欢迎你们到台湾来。I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all the participants for joining us today. In greeting Governor Huntsman and listening to his speech. From the podium here, I see former Vice Premier Wu Rongyi, and I see 3 former ambassadors to the U.S. I see a number of ambassadors to other countries, and I also see some current officials such as NSC officials and former officials, and I see many of my good friends in the academic community and many friends in the business community, including American Chamber of Commerce Executive Director Andrea Wu. And welcome you all to join us today. Indeed, Taipei Forum is very privileged to host this event for Governor Huntsman. He's not just another visiting U.S. dignitary. He's returning to Taiwan. It's his 回老家. He used to live among us. When he was, his first visit was the time when he was 19 years old. That was 30 years ago. Sorry, I reveal your age. 19 years old. And he lived in Taiwan for 2 years. And a talented young man, he quickly learned to speak Mandarin and even Minnan dialect. And over a decade ago, he returned to Taiwan, here at Solai. And this time, he came with a family, happily married, with, at the time, 5 or 6 children. And they lived in Tianmu for over a year. And I understand yesterday, they paid a nostalgic trip, a visit to Tianmu. Mrs. Huntsman has a big heart. He has done many volunteer work when she lived in the U.S. And she organized, launched and developed many programs for young people, teenagers, and children. And in Taiwan, during the year-long stay in Taiwan, she also volunteered her services and experiences in a Catholic church for an orphanage. And yesterday, I understand, they also paid a visit to that church. And we are very happy to see them in Taiwan once again. Governor Huntsman has led a very successful public life. And his career path, some of you may be familiar with his career path. But let me just briefly lay it out. His career path crossed with that of Taiwan's political development at a number of points. When he was appointed to as the U.S. ambassador to Singapore in 1992 and 93, that was the time when Taiwan and mainland held its very first high-level talks, in Singapore. And there he was in Singapore, understood both sides. I'm sure he helped fed a lot of useful input into the U.S. policy making. And in 2001 and 2003, he was deputy U.S. PR. And that was the time when Taiwan negotiated its way into that World Trade Organization. I don't know the details, I'm not a trade person, but I'm sure in that position, Governor Huntsman must have helped really Taiwan through the door of WTO. And after that, he was asked by, then he ran for governorship in Utah. He was elected, and he was re-elected as governor. And there, he proved that he could also not only excel, not only in foreign affairs, but in managing domestic issues. Utah happens to be one of the most conservative states in the U.S. We all know that. And he managed to overcome many difficulties, many problems by cutting taxes, reducing waste, and improving the overall economy of the state of Utah. So he was re-elected with great margin. And then, all of a sudden, President Obama, a Democrat, decided to draft him into diplomatic service, a Republican, and put him in Beijing. And again, there, he served his country well, we all understand. And a year ago, he decided to run in Republican presidential primary. And there he shared his visions with the American public. So we are honored today that he's going to share his vision with us, especially the challenges and opportunities for U.S. in 2012 and beyond. And Governor Huntsman is generous that he would speak for some time, and then we'll have some Q&A. So please welcome and give him a big hand.
主席，多谢你。我真的非常高兴能够跟你和我所有的朋友们今天在一起。就是我先应该说，班门弄斧，关公面前耍大刀。Or as Winston Churchill used to say, there's some things you just never do in life. You never kiss someone who's falling away from you. And you never climb a mountain that is leaning toward you. And you never speak to a group that is a whole lot smarter than you. And knows a whole lot more about the subject matter than you do. I'm honored to be here. Mr. Chief, for your hospitality and your friendship. I'm very, very grateful. I'm also delighted to be here with Mary Kay, my wife, with whom I lived in Tianmu back in the 1980s. And because of her volunteer work at the Tianmu Jiao in Tianmu, volunteering with the orphans that were there, we somehow got this idea that bringing in someone who needed life and a little bit of hope into our own family was a good thing to do. And that led to our daughter, who is here today, Gracie May, coming into our family many years later. But the seeds were planted right in Tianmu, right at the Tianmu Jiaotan. And we're very, very grateful for the way in which that provided inspiration and a sense of goodness about humanity and ways in which you can make communities and lives better. Now, Gracie, 她就是扬州人。中国话有一句话说“扬州出美女”，你看她就知道了。She's very famous in Yangzhou, much more famous than the former U.S. ambassador. In fact, so famous was Gracie that they put her face on a stamp in China. And I said, Gracie, you don't know how lucky you are, how rare that is. You have to die, usually, for the most part, before you're put on a stamp, and here she was, at a very, very young age. Well, Suchi mentioned that I've had the great fortune of intersecting during my life with Taiwan, over and over again, and it's quite true. And I go back to 1979, 1979年, when I first came, much different Taiwan. It was a tough time, for all the reasons that everybody in this room is familiar with. There were no guarantees that the U.S. and Taiwan would be able to move forward in a productive successful way as we have seen since then. But because of leadership on both sides, different parties, a common view of security and stability, the United States and Taiwan flourished in 1979. I again lived here in 1987. 1987年 Mary Kay and I were living in Tianmu. And almost seemingly overnight, martial law was lifted. 25年 The press was freed up. Opposition political parties started to flourish. I was here on the streets watching it all play out. At the time I was doing business. And it was a remarkable transformation that I was able to witness and compare and contrast what I had seen in 1979. Do I know my way around Taipei? Yes, I know my way around Taipei. Last night at the foreign ministry, what did they give me to eat? They gave me 臭豆腐。因为我就是告诉他们，我最喜欢吃的东西就是臭豆腐。他们不相信我的话。But they brought me some 臭豆腐, and it was the best that I'd had in a long while. Put a little 辣椒放在上面，还有旁边有泡菜，非常好吃，非常好吃。But I've lived in 内湖、松山、永和、中和、三重、板桥、花莲，还有花莲过去有一个叫做玉里。我很久以前就是坐那个火车，就是在那个花莲开始，一直到那个时候，玉里就是比较乡下的一个地方，有很好的这个西瓜 ，best in the world, a wonderful place. And my memories are clear and positive about all of that which I experienced. And then in 2001, as Suu Kyi mentioned, I had the opportunity of serving as United States Trade Ambassador when we worked on China and Taiwan's accession to the WTO, being in Doha, Qatar, November of 2001, for that historic period. And I was reminded at dinner last night as I was seated next to Dr. Lai, who was very critical at the time, and we worked closely, along with Jeff Bader, another good friend of mine, and it worked. And history was made by the work of some very, very insightful, visionary leaders, again, on all sides. And then in 2002, we started the TIFA process, Trade Investment Framework Agreement. There's more to do. There's more to do on beef. There's more to do on a TIFA. There's more to do, as I said, running for President of the United States, on a free trade agreement. Our vision should be big. It should be bold about what two economies based on freedom can achieve. But what I'm reminded of when I come back, because I haven't been back in 13 years, I'm reminded of the strengths that you have in Taiwan. And they're very clear for anyone who wants to come and compare and contrast as I have. Number one is people. Your people are friendly, smart, industrious, and committed. And everywhere I go, I am very impressed by the power and the strength of people living in a free society. And when you achieve that, there's no stopping. It's only up to your imagination and creativity about where you go. And number two is your commitment to values, which I think says more about you than anything else. Because what is most important about the United States? It's not our military, although our military is pretty strong. It isn't necessarily our economy, which is the largest in the world, still a quarter of the world's GDP. It's our values, a commitment to liberty, to democracy, to human rights, and to free markets. And when you can combine the energy and intelligence of a population with values, nothing can stop you. You've got it all. So when I hear about the challenges, every country has challenges. Every country. There's a period of insecurity that has enveloped the world. 不管你在欧洲，或者是美国，或者是中国大陆，或者台湾，there's a sense of insecurity. But then you have to take a moment and look at the gains that have been made and say, but we have the most important things you need for an economy to flourish. We have good people. We have strong institutions of education. We have values that leave the future open in whatever direction we want to take it. I just want to leave a few thoughts behind on the world and the United States, because we're experiencing, I think, a fairly unprecedented and historic period right now for the world. And then I'll tie it back to, I think, 3 or 4 things that I think are going to drive our future, whether you're sitting in Taiwan or whether you're in the United States. First, just a couple of thoughts on our place in history. The world seems to be locked in a vice grip of debt, fear, uncertainty, and transformation everywhere you go. This no longer is a black and white world that we're living in. There are increasingly shades of gray. And when there are shades of gray in the world, that's when friendship really matters. That's when the ground continues to feel shaky wherever you go. The global economy seems to have gone from puzzles, as one scientist described a little while ago, which was defined by answers. In the old days, the puzzles had easy answers, easily definable. Now we've entered an environment of mysteries with real uncertainties associated with them. How should we read our moment in time as we all proceed together, regardless of which side of the Pacific you find yourself on? The tectonic plates of the global economy and of global capitalism are shifting. The developed economies, like the United States, are deleveraging. Every family, every city, every state, and even our federal government, thank goodness, maybe they'll get around to it, deleveraging, taking debt out of the system. Because debt, to my mind, isn't an economic issue anymore for the United States, it's a national security issue. Because if you get too much debt, and if your debt to GDP ratio is 100%, can't compete anymore. So for us, deleveraging is critical. And we're also re-regulating, which is going to have some toll and cost on our economy over time. Healthcare, financial services reform, just to name a few. The global economy of $60 trillion will lose probably $6 trillion of growth in the next couple of years. Mostly because of problems on the demand side of the balance sheet, because of fear, because of uncertainty, because of lack of a clear direction going forward. The fear factor in today's global economy is very real. There is indeed, as I would describe it, and I know others have too, a new normal that has appeared. But this is only part of the story. I think a fuller description of this global dynamic is what I would refer to as rebalancing. Interrelated technological, macroeconomic, and demographic trends that are exposing severe inequalities and chronic debt problems. But these same forces are also propelling the global economy toward a more balanced and sustainable model of growth. Why? Because balance sheets will eventually improve. That's inevitable. And the world will be poised for growth. And these forces are bringing about the most significant global trend of my lifetime. The movement of capital from the developed world to the emerging economies. A phenomenon, a trend that during my relatively short lifetime probably transcends anything else that I've experienced in my life. This transformation has welcomed into the global economy 3.5 billion customers, the single most important economic event of my life. And what have the drivers been? You all know the drivers. The devolution of communism, 1977-78 reforms in China under Deng Xiaoping, the fall of the Berlin Wall, 10 years after Deng Xiaoping launched his reform. The second most significant trend involves the impact of the information age on capitalism. Innovations in computing, robotics, communication, medical services are all solving problems and extending our life well beyond what we ever thought would be achievable. And I've seen this firsthand as chairman of a cancer institute in the United States. But these same revolutionary achievements and breakthroughs are also permanently removing unskilled workers from the labor force and creating structural unemployment that hasn't been seen in generations. What is something I fear most in the United States going forward? Of course, I fear gridlock. I fear government's inability to make a decision, for heaven's sake. But I fear the structural unemployment, which is playing out. We need to keep an eye on it and be aware of it and address it. Another problem is the social, societal implications of our very rapid economic transformation, the political and societal shockwaves. There's an occupy everything movement these days, no matter where you are in the world. In other words, are we leaving people behind? As the pie gets bigger, more of the pieces are going to a smaller class of innovators and financiers. Look at the example of Apple, a company that everybody in this room knows well. Steve Jobs, one of the most creative human beings of my generation, revolutionized the computer, phone, movies, music, publishing industry. He, in the process, created $500 billion in market value. That today, $500 billion, accounts for 20% of U.S. retail sales growth in a recent quarterly report. One company, 20% of U.S. retail sales growth. Great for shareholders, but not good for labor, most of which is produced by semi-skilled workers, even from Foxconn, many are familiar with here. Soon to be robots, inevitably. Apple sold $128 billion worth of things last year, with only 63,000 employees, about $2 million per employee, when you look at it on a sales to employee ratio. That's triple the average for employee productivity in the United States, and 30 times that of McDonald's, which employs 400,000 people and generates $26 billion in sales per year, or $67,000 per worker. I'm here to tell you the trend in the United States and beyond will be more Apple and less McDonald's. And therefore, how do we prepare our workforces, our young people, for the reality of the information age and the impact that it is having on global capitalism, and the social shockwaves that will likely ensue if we're not on top of things? Well, back to the real world. I just want to share with you 4 things quickly. I know our time is somewhat limited. 4 things that I think are going to shape our world over the next few years. The United States, energy, China, and Europe. Let me start with the United States, where I understand they're having elections soon. The elections are going to be driven by economics, no doubt about that. And the election will come down to probably 3 key states that will be absolutely critical in a Republican and Democratic contest that will be very steady, very close, I think all the way to the finish line. What we have in the United States, to be very honest with you, because I talked about this during my own run for the presidency, and as I tell people, I'm a failed candidate for the presidency, so you should put whatever I say in proper perspective. We have 3 deficits in America. We have a fiscal deficit that is very real. We have a trust deficit. And we have a confidence deficit in the United States. I'm here to tell you we are a resilient country, as CJ knows, who's put in many years there. As Alexis de Tocqueville used to say when he visited America during the Jacksonian period, the 1830s, coming from France, the old world, with his friend Beaumont, he would say, the United States is a great country, not because its people are better than anybody else, but because America has an ability to repair her faults. And I think that aspect of American society is still true. We have the ability to repair our faults. Debt, 100% debt to GDP. It's unsustainable. And it's become a national security issue in my mind because of the inability to compete on the global stage when you're carrying that much debt. In order to get there, we have to solve Medicare, and we have to solve Social Security. And yes, we're even going to have to look at the Defense Department a little differently than we have in the past. So the days of being able to protect areas of spending in the United States, history. We can't afford to do that anymore. We're going to have to look at everything. When I say the Department of Defense, I have 2 boys in the United States Navy. I want the Defense Department to succeed and their budgets to be strong. But in America, we have no choice. We have to look at every area of spending. Our trust deficit. The last poll that was taken, 8% support by the public when it comes to Congress. 8%? I don't remember a time in my relatively short life where Congress has ever been this low. They're down to blood relatives, close friends, and staff members for the most part when you dissect the numbers. Why is this? Because our system needs reform. We have a problem when it comes to crony capitalism, if I could be very honest with you. And we've got to resolve it and address it by being frank and honest and direct. To my mind, we need term limits in America. Why? Because we have an institution called incumbency that reaches up and grabs people and doesn't let them go. In every election cycle, the same people go back, for the most part, time and time again. Number 2, we have to figure out how to finance campaigns better than we are doing today. Because our system of campaign finance is broken, and it's an embarrassment. And you can get people of average intelligence in a room together and tell them to come up with a scheme by which to finance campaigns. There's no way anybody would come up with what we have today. Yet it's hard to fix, and it must be done. Things like not paying Congress until they can balance a budget. No business in their right mind would pay executives if they couldn't turn in a budget that was not properly balanced. Reform. We need basic reform issues on an agenda that will boost the way in which the average American voter sees their elected officials and begins to see their institutions of power. Confidence. We can regain our confidence. But it was very telling when I sat in a meeting in China with a very well-known minister on the economic side. And it was on trade and investment matters, and after the meeting he pulled me aside. And he said, Ambassador Huntsman, he said, please tell your people in America not to lose their confidence Because when you lose your confidence in America, we all suffer. It goes around the world. And I thought for a moment, here I am, the United States ambassador from a great country, being lectured by someone in China about confidence. The world is changing. But the point was a very good one, and that is we have lost confidence in our direction. Yet when you look at what the United States has on the asset side of its balance sheet, it's still a strong nation with great people. I think our greatest strength in America is we're able to assimilate people from all different backgrounds, bring them into our society, and give them a chance, give them an opportunity to succeed. This is our greatest strength, and it's something that renews our economy and our nation's fabric every now and again. Number two, we're still the most innovative economy on earth. It's a very telling contrast when you go from Washington, D.C., which is a very depressing town to be in sometimes because nobody gets anything done, and you travel out to Silicon Valley, California. I gave a speech recently at Stanford University and took some time to visit an investment company that's invested in Facebook, Google, and all the other big names. And I did a roundtable with young people from India, from China, different parts of Asia, thinking about new ideas, optimistic about the future, thinking for them Facebook was old. They were already thinking steps beyond Facebook, and I thought, this is America. This is the place that the world envies, because we bring the sense of freedom and risk and capital and strong educational institutions together that make up success. We still have that in America, even if you have to look from time to time. Number three, we still have the finest military in the history of the world. Volunteer. I have two boys in the Navy. I'm proud that they're there. And we still have young men and women who are willing to go off to war, which is a very unusual thing. We've been at war now in the Middle East for 10 years. And it's time to clean it up. We've got some healing to do, some patching up to do, and we have a lot of soldiers who they and their families have made an enormous contribution in terms of the toll that it has taken, financially and otherwise, on them. We owe them a great deal. We have to begin a process to begin recognizing that strength in our society. We have great colleges and universities. Still, the California system, because the budget has gone down, will be getting a third less money, and they'll have to increase tuition. But we still have, arguably, the finest set of colleges and universities in the world in America. Everyone still comes to attend them. When I was living in China, I watched every day outside of the embassy. People lined up to attend our universities. China has just overtaken India. Most students in the United States studying in our college and university, 150,000 right now. Finally, we still in America have a great volunteer spirit. We still run to save people when they're in distress. And we still have the ability to want to take our time and to make communities better. That's still, I think, a central part of the American experience. And ethics still count. When we have lapses on Wall Street, and when banks make mistakes, there's a price to pay. And there should be. And there's an overall review of ethics. So the United States, when you look at the balance sheet overall, still strong. We're experiencing a period where our confidence is down. On the economic front in the United States, remember 1954, because that was the first year that the Dow average regained its pre-depression levels of performance. So you say, when are we going to be back in action? Not going to be tomorrow. Not going to be the fourth quarter of this year. It's going to take some time. But all you have to do is look back in history a little bit and see how long it has taken. Usually from a strong economic crisis like we've experienced, at least 3 to 5 years. And if you look at the average of 3 to 5 years, we're probably ahead of schedule somewhat in terms of our rebounding from the depths of despair a few short years ago economically. 20 years of cheap money and debt built up by families, by corporations, by local governments won't resolve itself quickly. It will take some time. And the growth will be hindered by the housing market. You see, in America, we still have 5 million homes that are part of the inventory, the backlog. And if you stop to think that housing has always been probably 1/3 of our nation's GDP growth, new homes aren't being built. And they're not likely to be built because the inventory is so high and must be worked out. So in order for us to grow beyond 2 and 3% from a GDP standpoint, the housing market must be addressed. Number 2, let me move from the United States to energy. The United States has been given one of the greatest gifts in 100 years. It's called shale gas. And the man's name is George P. Mitchell, who is responsible for it. You're probably going to be hearing a lot more about his name as shale becomes more and more viable. The biggest innovation in the United States, I would argue, in 2 decades. 37% of our U.S. natural gas is from shale, and it's soon to be 50%. So if you can imagine this, unthinkable a few short years ago, by 2030, the United States could be a self-sufficient energy country. I never thought I'd be standing before a crowd during my lifetime uttering those words. Now energy in America is about economic development. It has become a serious driver for growth in North America. 600,000 jobs have been created with huge investment flows coming in. Absolutely astonishing. 600,000 jobs, that's how many jobs have been let go from local governments in all 50 states as they have downsized to become more efficient. Imagine if we didn't have 600,000 from shale, making up for that, adding to the economy. There are some environmental concerns, methane leakage in terms of the fracking technology that is used. But closed-loop capture systems are being developed very, very quickly. And I think they're going to assuage most of the concerns there. All of this means that we will have an opportunity in the United States shortly to address one of our most fundamental needs, that of powering on a reliable, cheap, cost-efficient way the future of our economy. And it means we're going to have to be strong enough and courageous enough to say to oil companies, you've owned the distribution system for a very long time. Those days are gone. We're going to have to come up with new distribution systems that allow new forms of gas, clean, cheap, natural gas, to get from point A to point B. Now, why do I say that? Because I drove a natural gas car when I was governor of Utah, the only governor to drive a natural gas car. People thought I was crazy until on those radio programs, people would call the governor. They think the governors can solve all the issues. I deal with OPEC and oil prices. They say, Governor, we're tired of paying $4.50 per gallon of gasoline. What are you going to do about it, Mr. Governor? I say, let me tell you what I paid this morning. I paid $1. And they would stop in their tracks. And I'd say, let me tell you how you can do it. You can go to a local entrepreneur who can convert your car like they did my big black Suburban. But the only thing lacking, I found, was a distribution network. And we started to address that. And we created a natural gas highway in our state that allowed for somebody to drive from Colorado all the way through to California with a natural gas car. It's easy to do. You just have to focus on it, make it a priority. So if you stop to think that the economic benefits of gas, which is $2 per MMBTU, the equivalent economically of $10 oil prices, not $90 or $100 oil, but $10 oil prices that U.S. manufacturers are beginning to consider and transition into. The largest coal power plant just converted to gas in the United States. I'm on the board of Ford Motor Company. I'm also on the board of Caterpillar Corporation. They use a lot of gas. And they're thinking very radically in terms of this new energy economy that is upon us. All of this carries enormous strategic, military, and diplomatic implications for the world. And I can't even begin to describe what those are likely to be. Number three, let me just say a couple of comments about Europe. I'd have to say that the single most important step taken by Europe since the end of World War II, that of integration, is now very much in question. The European Monetary Union, I guess you can say the cart was put before the horse. I guess you could say that, in a sense, two people were going out to be married, and before they got married, they opened a joint bank account and started transacting business. And that's what we have now in Europe. You can't have an economic and a fiscal union without having a political union. And I'm not sure that a political union will ever be possible in Europe. In order for it to work, Europe will need to channel some of its sovereignty into a federal experiment. I'm not sure that's doable. It doesn't look promising. Investment into Europe last year was down 19%. This year, you can only imagine what that drop-off is going to be. NATO has, for the most part, demilitarized itself. I think Afghanistan will likely be the last major conflict that we will see. Europe could be on the doorstep of a prolonged, deep recession. In order for Europe to survive, I think a few things are probably going to have to be considered. Number one, inflation may need to be introduced by the European Central Bank. Number two, serious need to recapitalize and provide the banks a good old-fashioned stress test, like we've been through in the United States. Number three, Germany is going to have to step up its game, which, if you stop to think about it, is probably impossible, because for Angela Merkel, it's not an economic issue anymore, it's a political issue. How do you sell, messaging-wise, the need to help reinforce or bail out weaker states in your neighborhood when you've gone through the same thing over the last 12 years? And you've survived, and you've succeeded. It becomes almost an impossible political task for Merkel. Or subsidies from the richer states are going to have to be made to the poorer states. And I'm not sure that's going to happen. We have that in the United States. That's part of the way that our fiscal union works. We have labor mobility in the United States. You need labor mobility for a fiscal union to work. You need to recognize the stronger states versus the poorer states. We don't talk about it a lot in the United States, but that's how our tax scheme works. In the end, the economic and political disparities among the member states may be too great. But in the short term, difficulties with Greece, Spain, with Italy, may create contagion for all of us to some degree, because we're all exposed to what is now playing out in Europe. Finally, let me just say a couple of things about China. Now, my first introduction to China was as a relatively young man. My first trip to China was with Ronald Reagan in the early 1980s, where I had a chance to see Deng Xiaoping and witness the reforms that he had embarked upon. And I thought a lot about the legacy of Deng Xiaoping, because that's coming to an end with the 18th Party Congress in October. Why is it coming to an end? It's coming to an end because the new leadership team was not chosen by Deng Xiaoping, not blessed by Deng Xiaoping. It's a new generation. And the Deng Xiaoping dynasty, which was from the late 1970s to 2012, I think will be remembered by three things primarily. One, the diplomatic opening to the rest of the world. Number two, the economic opening to the rest of the world, and the liberalization which ensued. And three, primacy of the Communist Party. That it will remain the central point of decision-making, and there will be no alternatives. Now the fifth generation is coming up. Xi Jinping, Li Keqiang, Wang Qishan, Wang Yang, all those who are going to occupy the new standing committee of the Politburo. And they're going to have to address three questions that are far different from what Deng Xiaoping had to deal with during his years. One is China becoming more repressive domestically. Number two, is China becoming more economically nationalistic? Number three, is China becoming more assertive internationally? And there's some evidence to suggest that these are all very real questions that will have to be addressed by the fifth generation. Now, I have found that the fifth generation is different than the fourth generation. I know many in the fifth generation. I've known many in the fourth generation. I knew some in the third generation. They're tempered and impacted, not by events like the Great Leap Forward, 1960 to 1964. Not by events like the Cultural Revolution, 1966 to 1976, although many suffered during that period. I found the fourth generation, because of what they had learned during that period of history, didn't want to repeat it. And it made for a level of humility, having seen the worst that mainland China can suffer through, never wanting to see it again. The fifth generation comes up. What is their sole point of reflection and impact? Probably an economy that's grown for 30 years by 8, 9, 10%. Do they think that China has arrived? Of course they do. Do they think that the United States may be experiencing some moments of difficulty? Of course they do. Are they going to be a tough generation to negotiate with? Of course. There will be a heightened sense of nationalism, a heightened sense of their place in time, and it will have implications for business, and it will have implications for government as well. So we'll follow those 2012 changes, the 18th Party Congress, with great interest. With respect to the broader U.S.-China relationship, what have we seen in the last few years? And what is the challenge on the horizon? The U.S.-China relationship has gone from a bilateral relationship, it was based on all of the typical elements of bilateral relationship building, economics, regional security, culture, to a global relationship, where the discussions are about North Korea, they're about Iran, they're about economic rebalancing in Europe, they're about Burma, they're about South China Sea. It's a global agenda. The challenge is the relationship isn't ready to take on some of these global challenges. It's still working through the difficulty of forging a global relationship. China has come up to the world stage, not yet prepared in every sense of the term, to deal with the responsibility and the leadership that comes with their position in the world. This will be the challenge for the United States going forward. How do you forge that relationship that would suggest that the U.S.-China relationship is more than a bilateral relationship? I will just end by this. I think the most important aspect of the U.S.-China relationship is America's ability to project her values. Because I think in the end, our economy will go up and down. We'll go through different presidents and different administrations. But our values should always remain the same. And we should be unafraid to articulate those values. They're about liberty, they're about democracy, they're about human rights, and they're about free markets. And we're only believable when we practice them ourselves at home. And we only have credibility when we can stand tall based upon our own successes in these particular areas. I was reminded just in conclusion of one visit I made, which brought all of this home. I went out to see a young woman by the name of Ni Yulan, who's a political dissident in China. And I followed her story and wanted to meet her. This is what I felt the United States ambassador should do. And She was in trouble, like a lot of people at the time. And she had been tortured to the point where she couldn't walk. She was in bed in her apartment. No electricity, no heat, no internet connection. And I drove my car. I didn't drive it, I had a driver. It wouldn't let me drive. I drove my bicycle. In a large black armored Cadillac with the American flag on the front. And I drove down the alleyways outside of Beijing to this whole apartment building where she was living. I got out of the car and walked through some security people there. And I'll never forget the look that I got when I walked into her apartment building. She didn't have to say anything. I could see in her face. I could see in her eyes. The United States had arrived with values, cared about her. It didn't mean anything politically. She was of no value politically. She was damaged. Yet she was trying to break through in terms of a broader conversation about basic human dignity and the worth of the individual. And I arrived, and it wasn't me. It was the United States that she saw walk in the room, because she teared up when she saw me. And she could barely speak. And I knew exactly what was going on in her head. She was recognized, even through all the difficult days, months, and years that she had experienced. The United States still cared about her issues, because they went right to the core of our values in the United States. May it always be that way. May we always together share those values, which I think have made our people very, very strong, and sets us up nicely for a continued successful future. Thank you all so very much.
Thank you, Governor, for an excellent speech, most comprehensive, most inspiring. I like particularly, if I may, before I turn to open the floor, I'd like to make one point. I also agree with you that Americans should have confidence in yourself. Among other things, demographically, U.S. is the only industrial country that is still growing. And it's as shown in your family. But more than that, I have many American friends who are scholars or officials or at different other professions. Many of them have adopted children, as you did. A former Deputy Secretary of State adopted 5 children. I was so surprised. I asked him, "Do you live with you? Do they live with you?" And he said, "Yes, all 5 live with you." And I think that's compassion, that's love, that's sympathy, it's the values. And big heart is what free countries are made of. So I even wrote op-ed here in Taiwan, arguing that U.S. is not on decline in the long term, and so U.S. ought to have confidence in itself. But that's my own personal view. I happened to have a chance to join Governor Huntsman in April at a World Forum. He was asked to give a keynote at dinner opening night, and his speech was as inspiring as this one. But believe me, his QA was even better. So please feel free, and it's a rare opportunity for us to meet him. He had been away from Taiwan for a long time, and been busy in public and in private. So please take advantage of the next half an hour and chat with our old friend. Please. Okay, Dr. Liang, economist of Zhonghua Economic Research, Zhonghua Institute of Economic Research.
I think all of us, we agree that you just gave a very excellent speech, and we really learned a lot. And concerning with energy, you mentioned, I fully agree that the shale gas is really quite important development of the United States. And so the energy supply in the United States, energy supply problem in the United States might can be solved very largely by this kind of development. But still some problem is the energy that is consumption. The energy efficiency in the United States still not so good, and the greenhouse gas emission is still a big problem. So especially to cope with the climate change problem. I don't know what is your point? What is your point of view related with the recent U.S. government energy policy, especially the greenhouse gas reduction policy, whether that is correct, and what is your opinion? And you think in the future, is that possible U.S. will change its policy and comply with the UNFCCC like a Kyoto Protocol, join the similar scheme to limit the greenhouse gas reduction, greenhouse gas emission control in the United States. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question. To show you how the political dialogue is changing in America, this is the first question I've had on greenhouse gases, probably 1 year. People are talking about it in the United States. Why? Because the economy is weak, and there's no leadership leading out on it that wants to take a risk. So consequently, the talk is about jobs, it's about getting back on our feet economically, and not a lot about climate change, or emissions, or any kind of scheme that would allow us to move toward an improvement in that particular area. I'll just say a couple of things. First of all, I don't think you're going to see any movement in the United States until there's political leadership that recognizes that there is some value in moving in this direction and in addressing it head on. Number two, I think the movement toward, let me just say, I was alone on the stage of Republican candidates for the presidency when I said I defer to science when it comes to climate change. And if there are 99 out of 100 climatologists who say that there's something happening, and we might want to recognize that and address it from a public policy standpoint, I say that's good enough for me. No one in Congress that I know of is an expert. I don't know any physicists in Congress. Yet it's become a great source of political discussion, speculation, where, let me put it this way, if the Cancer Institute that I'm chairman of, you had 99 out of 100 oncologists who came to you and said, for prostate cancer, we're going to recommend the following course of treatment. Everyone would say, the community has spoken. Maybe we should pay a little bit of attention. But there's something different in this particular area. It's become a very thorny issue politically. So while no one is talking about it, it's very interesting to note that progress has been made, all by itself. Why is that? Because of the movement more toward natural gas and the 50% lessened emissions that come from natural gas. So if we were to come up with a plan 5 years ago on reducing emissions without the advent of natural gas, I would argue that we wouldn't be nearly as far along as we are today with natural gas. So I think that all by itself is going to be a very significant driver and contributor to cleaning up our air and improving our quality of life, because it also becomes a health issue for a lot of people in certain parts of the United States. I knew that well from being governor. The second point I would make is it's really hard to make progress on this issue unless you're willing to deal on a global basis. wake up in the state of Utah, which is inland from California, and our skies would be polluted by emissions from China and India, which get caught up in the jet stream and taken right across the Pacific Ocean, you know that you're living in a global environment, and everyone's impacted by the actions and the decisions of other people. So for the United States to take action, leadership is one thing. Two, coming up with a workable plan is another. And I think that's only doable if you've got the key emitters engaged. Now, by that I would include China as being a key emitter. We all know the numbers today. And we're only going to be able to do that if we get our scientific communities together and begin to harmonize the data that we're all looking at. So what struck me when I was governor, trying to get Western governors, when I used to chair the Western Governors Association, get governors focused on some of these issues, we found very quickly that the only way we could get movement was to bring China into the conversation. And then it became very apparent that we were both reading from different scientific texts. So you have the physicists, the climatologists, the atmospheric scientists in the United States who are reading different data than they're reading in China. And I argued at the time, as I did as ambassador, that we should start with just the basics. Let's start exchanging our scientific communities and harmonizing the data that allows us to understand what's being emitted, how much is being emitted, and what in fact are the results of those emissions, because you can't get to policy solutions until you have a common benchmarking. You can diagnose the problem, right? So I would say that initially it's going to take some sort of joint effort on the part of the American and Chinese scientific communities. And there are certain professional groups who can do this, to begin benchmarking what the data means, how it's affecting our populations and our communities, how it's impacting the broader environment, and then begin to talk about solutions longer term. I think we're ways off.
Thank you. One moment, I see it hand over there. Is that, I'm sorry, the spotlight is too strong. Dr. Song? Dr. Song Yan Hui of the Academic.
Thank you, Chairman Su, Governor Huntsman. My name is Ingrid Song from Academia Sinica. I have two sets of questions related to foreign policy, which, in my opinion, are important challenges and opportunities for the United States in the year 2012. The first set question is about U.S. accession to the Law Convention. Do you support or oppose U.S. accession to the 1982 United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea? Do you think it's possible for the U.S. to become a party to that convention after the November election? And after that, if the United States becomes a party to that convention, the South China Sea will become more peaceful or stable, or are we going to see more maritime confrontation between the United States and China? So that's the first set of questions. Second set of questions, the South China Sea disputes, in my opinion again, are important challenges and opportunities for both the United States and the Ma administration. Do you think the Ma administration should side with the United States or with mainland China, or with both to handle the South China Sea disputes? Thank you.
These are thorny issues. I could find myself in deep, deep trouble depending upon how I answer. I'm glad my wife is here to save me if I find myself in such a dilemma. First, with two sons in the United States Navy, I'd have to say that if I didn't subscribe to the law of the seas, they would probably disown me. Because it has been talked about and vetted and put on the table, administration after administration. Congress, of course, with the treaty, has to take action. The Senate does specifically. I believe that Ronald Reagan was the last president who actually said he would support it and move forward. For purposes of having a framework for discussion, not that you're going to solve any of the sovereignty issues, that won't be the result, but you begin with a framework that begins to spell out the fundamentals geographic claims, the territorial understandings that I think are critically important in this very arcane and murky area of maritime and sea law. So that would be my first answer to you. Second, I'm not sure that we're going to have any solution on the disputed islands, whether you're looking at the South China Sea, whether you're looking at Diaoyu Islands or Senkaku. I don't think anyone in this room will be alive when a resolution is found. I'm just a realist. So what do you have to do in that case? You have to manage it. You have to exert diplomacy. You have to engage in confidence-building measures, and you have to come up with a code of conduct. You have to come up with a code of conduct that will hold you temporarily as you move into the future, that will allow you to resolve disputes. It will sort out some of the issues regarding natural resources, which will be very, very important. And I suspect that we'll begin to see some early answers on a code of conduct arrangement coming out of ASEAN. Now I say that because I think ASEAN is a little bit ahead as a political grouping on this particular issue, given the urgency of the Vietnam's claim and the tension that surrounds that ongoing dispute, to say nothing of the Philippines. So ASEAN, I think, in the United States has certainly supported a collective approach to problem solving around these issues as opposed to bilateral problem solving, in which case nobody stands a chance. So I'm very curious to see what comes out of the problem solving in ASEAN, in the development of a code of conduct, because I think what we learn from that through ASEAN will be applicable in Northeast Asia, because the issues will be the same, and I think they will be just as relevant. But I'm not sanguine at all that we're going to come up with any kind of answer short term, because you're dealing with the most intractable issues of international politics. Whenever you have sovereignty, ethnicity, religion at play, you've got challenges that are sometimes unresolvable. And in this case, you have at least one of the three. You have sovereignty that is never easy to resolve. You'll never find a conclusive answer to this. Let's hope that the parties are willing to engage in a process that will yield some sort of code of conduct and ways to carry us into the next generation without conflict from ever breaking out.
Thank you, Professor Yan Zhengzhen. Before we return to Taiwan, he taught at University of Alaska.
University of what?
Alaska.
Okay. My question is much easier. I think it's on domestic politics. When you were in the primary, we know there were a lot of other candidates keep emerging to challenge Romney. First you have Beckman, then you have King, then you have Perry and Gingrich, and eventually Santorum. And your number was about to pick up after New Hampshire, and then you quit. So my question is, like, every other candidate seemed to be an alternative. And when you were about to, emerge as the alternative, you stopped. Why? Okay, so that's my first question. And then the second question is really after, with great vision, with your articulation of all the future of America, will you run again next time?
My wife, Mary Kay, told me at the beginning of our journey, she said, let me make something very clear. If you pander, and if you sign any of those damn pledges, I will leave you. So I knew the rules of the road were set from the very beginning. But it was a fascinating journey in the sense that without wearing the shoes of a candidate, it's very hard to understand the process in the early primary states and why things kind of play out as they do. I would argue that you've got to be a little crazy to run for president once, and probably very crazy to run twice. I don't know that I'm very crazy, or a little crazy, but we've learned a lot about it. And here's what we've learned. We've learned that you have to start early. Everyone in the race had an early start. I've learned that you've got to raise a whole lot of money, which I think is ruinous to the American political system, quite frankly. That has to be fixed. And the one thing that I would do if ever I were elected president, I would engage in reform that fixed the way we finance campaigns and these super PACs that are taking our democracy away. And I would move toward things like term limits, closing the revolving door for members of Congress who move out into the lobbying profession. And you wonder why Americans don't believe in Congress anymore. For all these reasons and more. So you have to start early. You have to raise money early to scare off people and to be formidable. Then you have to decide if you're going to be competitive in Iowa and in South Carolina and in New Hampshire. Now, we got a late start, and I looked at the map, and I said, here's Iowa. Iowa's full of a lot of farmers, a lot of soybean farmers, and they get some money from the government in the form of subsidies. I don't like that. I said very early on that I don't believe in subsidies to soybean farmers, and all the soybean farmers in Iowa said, no to Huntsman. And I said, well, I can do what the other candidates have done, Romney and the others, and I can go from one answer to another, depending upon what year I'm running. I'm not going to do that. My wife would leave me. I'm not going to do that. So if you're going to be consistent, then you have to suffer the implications. And I wasn't in favor of subsidies for a very conservative Christian base. I was in favor of civil unions for gays and lesbians, which was unique in the Republican view. They didn't like that. They didn't like some of my positions on the environment. Even though in my state, we become #1 in job creation. We became the #1 fastest growing state in America, the best economy, and voted by the Pew Center in America, the best managed state in America. They didn't care about any of that. It's, are you willing to meet our litmus tests, sign pledges? We sign a pledge that you will do. I wouldn't sign any pledges. No way, I don't do that. But I believe that the people who elect you deserve your full time and attention, and not special interest groups who try to wrap you up. So Iowa was a no-go. And I didn't want to put money there. I didn't want to spend a lot of time there because it was nothing that we could succeed at. So then we looked at New Hampshire. I thought New Hampshire is an interesting state. There's a very open electorate, a lot of independents, a lot of free-spirited Democrats and Republicans, always unpredictable how they vote. They vote for the person. And I thought, if we spend some time in New Hampshire, we can do well there. And then South Carolina was along the lines of Iowa in terms of the organizing base of the party. Very conservative, and just a small fraction of the overall population that determines who gets out. So we learned the lesson that whoever does well in Iowa builds momentum. That was very important. We didn't participate in Iowa, so we didn't build any momentum coming into New Hampshire. That, for us, was a challenge. And we were moving up very quickly in New Hampshire, and I would argue that if we had another week or two, I think we would have done very well. We took 3rd place. I think we would have taken 2nd place. Ron Paul took too many of the independents, so we were winning away very quickly. So if we had another week, I think we would have done #2 in New Hampshire. And I didn't tell anybody this at the time, but in my mind, we had to do #2 in New Hampshire to get credibility. If we took #3, that was good, but not good enough. And the media kept asking, what do you have to place? What is your expectation? And I'd say, we have to beat the marketplace. Because like a stock trading on the marketplace sets an expectation for a company and for a politician. And if you fall short of the expectations, you lose. And I didn't want to waste people's time if we fell short of expectation. And we did in New Hampshire. If we take a #2, we would have gone right on, and I think done very well beyond. We had the endorsement of the biggest paper in South Carolina, the state. We had some of Governor Huckabee's supporters in South Carolina, who were part of our team. We had Governor Carroll Campbell's family, very supportive of us, but we didn't take second to Hampshire. And that for me was a blow of sorts. And I thought, we can keep going, raising money, you know, behind in the polls in some of the earliest days, but I don't want to waste people's money. And I don't want to waste my family's time unless we can beat market expectations, which we didn't do in New Hampshire. So that was the reason that we chose not to move forward. Where do we go from here? I don't know. But November will be very telling in terms of how that evolves. But I will tell you this, there's something happening in American politics that is consistent with most people in America now becoming unaffiliated. So when I tell people the fastest growing political party in America isn't Republican, isn't Democrat, it's the unaffiliated. Young people move up, they go to school, they understand the issues, they're unaffiliated. They follow the person. So with the demographic changes in America, both in terms of immigration and politically, I would argue that there's going to be openings in the next election cycle, maybe 2 or 3, for an alternative approach. Third party, fourth party, whatever, that will break up the status quo. Because I don't think the status quo right now is delivering the vision, the courage, the long-term thinking that we need in our country. And the American people know that, and I think they're very frustrated by it. But there's no way you can get a third candidate now, because they're restricted from getting on state ballots. Very difficult to get on state ballots. That has changed. This year, there was a movement, Americans Elect, that got on 35 or 40 of the 50 state ballots. Never happened before. So now that that has been done, I think the political dynamic will change in the years to come, quite dramatically. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. Dr. Charles Gao raised his hand earlier. And someone in the back, I can't see you. I think it's a little too dark, but Dr. Gao first and then over there, okay?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Governor Huntsman. I missed the opportunity to have the chance to listen to you both in Beijing and San Francisco a couple of years ago. And today's speech is more than compensated what I've lost and missed out. And also I have to express my thanks to Taipei Foreign Board Chairman Dr. Shu Qi. It's not easy to arrange a speech, a seminar like this, because so difficult, involves so much work. I myself involved with Global Views, Yuan Jian Ca Si. In the past 2 months, we invited 2 distinguished speakers from the United States. One is Larry Summers, and the other is Ida Vogel. And I know how much time involved. Vogel's Chinese is as good as yours, but Larry Summers is not. In both speeches,
Don't tell Larry.
no. In both of their speeches and then in their conversations with President Ma, and I know that they both urge Taiwan or to increase or to improve, even accelerate the relation between Taiwan and China, not to mention the United States. And in Taiwan, as you realize, that, by the way, my profession is economist, no, I'm with Global Views. In my view as economist, time is not on the side of Taiwan. For the interest of Taiwan, for the interest of Taiwan alone, we ought to do more with China, not less. But Taiwan is a democratic society, and it takes bipartisan. It takes the cooperation of the other party. Now, KMT is in power, but DPP certainly has enough power to make it difficult. So my question is to ask you today, is because we do have bipartisan leadership here. My question today is from your vantage point of view, as a such faithful good friend to Taiwan, you think the government, I don't care if it's my government or it's DP government, you think the government in power ought to accelerate or to improve the relation with China or to control or to make it less? Thank you.
become more and more difficult. There were no issues before because there's no discussion, nothing to talk about, nothing to do. And now there's a lot going on, and of course it's going to become, with each step in each year, more and more difficult. And that means you should not lose hope, not lose a sense of direction, but keep going. And continue working a framework that allows for confidence, progress, peace, and prosperity to carry the day in the cross-strait relationship. You know, the world should be very, very grateful to both sides for the work that has been done. No one imagined at this point that we would be sitting here today talking about this kind of success. Of course it's difficult, and of course it's uncertain going forward, but I think the work must continue because of the trade flows back and forth, the investment, the people exchanges that have resulted from that sense of security. 1 million people from the mainland come here every year. What do you think they see when they turn on the television? They learn something. What do you think they see, as President Ma told me yesterday, when they cover the presidential election? They didn't block it this time. That's a good thing. People learn from that. What about the interaction, people to people, heart to heart, head to head, about two different systems? There's an educational opportunity here that I think is very real. And it's interesting because China isn't saying no. They're saying it's okay, let's keep it going. Students even are coming to Taiwan. So I think it's a very important process and one that is way further developed than I ever would have guessed as someone who's lived in Asia 4 times and lived here twice and in Beijing once. And I compliment you on that success, as I did President Ma yesterday. It's hard, and you don't get any immediate political returns from it. And in a democracy like yours, you're always worried about political returns. But there's also something called vision and leadership, where it's important to do the right thing that benefits the most people. So I compliment you on that, and I would say keep it up.
Thank you, Governor. I see 2 media representatives there, the gentleman in front and the gentleman in the back.
Yes, Governor Huntsman, it's really nice to see you. And I'm a reporter here in Taiwan, 中天电视, and I was posted 13 years back in DC as a diplomatic correspondent. There are 2 questions. The first one is kind of personal. You mentioned once that 2 of your boys are serving in the U.S. Navy. Obviously, you're proud of that. And we all know that not many of the U.S. politicians send their sons to the military. I can think of Senator John Webb and of course the Jim Webb and Senator John King. So I was wondering, what is the dynamic within your family that made these possible? And the second of all, I was wondering from your perspective, Governor Romney's his challenges facing the religious right, evangelicals, and the Tea Party.
Both excellent questions. One I've never been asked before, which is always good when you run into a good reporter who can throw you an original question. Well, I was born in the Navy, and they paid $25 for my birth, which I've always been very grateful for. Since I was born on the GI Bill. And my mother's always complained that she still paid too much, $25 for my birth. But it's interesting, my dad, my uncles, both my grandparents were naval officers. And for their generation, the generation I was raised in, it was the greatest, highest thing you could do. They never got beyond lieutenant. They always taught me that if ever you see somebody with 3 stripes or 4 stripes, you salute, because no huntsman would ever become a commander or a captain, for heaven's sake. It never happened. But it always left a very lasting impression in my mind about family members who would always put their country first, highest. They'd wear a uniform, they'd sacrifice, and they'd go to serve. And for our kids, as we were growing up, we always talked about choices. You can lan fish again, like a lot of kids do. And you can think about me, what is best for you, or you can take your time, you can give it to something more important, your choice. But as we talked about it, I could tell that their interest in serving in the military was increasing over time. And then when I was governor, when you're governor of a state in America, you're also the commander-in-chief of the National Guard. So I had a whole army that I could set off if I wanted to declare war on Idaho. I could do that, but I never did that, not once. And they watched a lot of the soldiers when they came back from Iraq and from Afghanistan. And they saw me as governor when I had to go out to speak at funerals or to be with family members who had just lost a dad or a husband in war. And I think that left a very lasting impression in their minds about the service and sacrifice that is made. They saw it very close up, and I think it really did leave an impression. Our second son, who just started at the Naval Academy, is a football player. So he was recruited to play on the football team. So maybe you'll see him on television when Navy beats Notre Dame. So that's kind of how they made their way through. I think with Governor Romney, there's a certain percentage of Americans who are never going to warm up to him because of his religion. And I think there is such a high degree of animosity toward President Obama by Republicans and conservatives that they will overlook many of President Romney's, or Governor Romney's, maybe Governor Romney's faults. It was inconceivable early on because he had been on different sides of issues. He came from a position that was not necessarily advantageous in being a Mormon. So there were barriers that many predicted that he might not get over. And I think in the end it will be a very close election, maybe too close to call, right down to the very end. And I think you'll see that the evangelicals and the conservatives will ultimately rally around him because there's no alternative. He's it. And then the question will be, who gets the independents? Who gets the large number of roaming voters? They voted for Obama last time. Their minds are open. They might vote for somebody else this time. They're neither Republican nor Democrat. They vote for the person. And they're up for grabs. And I would say that the Republicans must do a better job in messaging in ways that speak to minority populations, recent immigrant populations, women, and youth. Those are three critically important independent blocks of voters that are still roaming around out there. So far as I can tell, they haven't really decided. And I think that will go down to the very end in terms of ultimately how the race is won or lost for President Obama. If he loses, it will be because he failed to get the large group that he won 4 years ago, that independent group that I talked about. He won them in high percentages. And if he doesn't win this time, it will be because he lost that very group. And they will be so disenchanted they will flee.
Thank you. Yeah, the gentleman far back. Please identify yourself. 我看不清楚，请自我介绍。
Thank you. Thank you, the correspondent of Radio Free Asia. And at the end of your speech, you just talked about Yulan, the political dissident. And also, most of us remember during the period of Jasmine Revolution, the crowd gathered in the Wang Fuji Street. You were there too. So how do you think about the human rights in China, human rights status in China? And could any possibility of improvement in the next leadership of Xi Jinping? Thank you.
I think there's a very healthy conversation taking place in China. Not one necessarily that the party expected to happen, but it's being driven by 600 million internet users and 90 million bloggers and a lot of young people who have access to information like never before, who are talking more about these issues. and they're pushing the envelope, as they say. I think the best way for the United States to handle human rights, it should never be a discussion or a decision of should we or should we not talk about human rights. Of course we should talk about human rights. That's core to who we are as people, and it always has been. And when America shines her light, it moves the world. It inspires the world. When we close up and we decide that for whatever reason we're not going to speak on the issues that made us who we are as people in my country, then I think we do ourselves a disservice. And that's never a good thing. So I'd say that what is America's brand? What is America famous for in the world? I think our brand very much is liberty and democracy and human rights and free markets. And we're still trying to figure out how best to practice all of those, because you never reach the perfect endpoint, but we've tried for 200 plus years to perfect that which our founding fathers gave to us by way of an incredible design. And it's also a system and values that have inspired the world. And I'd say that the world is a better, safer place for the most part because of some of these fundamental values. So I would argue that the U.S. should always handle human rights, obviously in ways that are sensitive, in ways that take into account local customs and traditions, and how the word is even translated. Because I know in some languages when you translate human rights, it comes out differently, and it's processed in the minds of people differently. But we should always hold true to those core values. And I think we're always stronger when we do, and we always regret when we don't at some point later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. I think the time is really running out. So we ought to give last word to Lee. Even though I only see your back, please identify yourself.
你好，我是联合报名部的陈一秀。那我想请问一下，您对于弃台论有什么样的看法？那您是支持还是反对？谢谢。
对什么有看法？
弃台论。
弃台论。
你可不可以帮给我翻译？我听不太清楚。
She's representing United Daily News, and she's asking if you could comment on some remarks made by some people in the States now who are talking about abandoning Taiwan. People like Owen Brzezinski, Admiral Owen Brzezinski, and they were talking about that Taiwan's too much a mess, too much trouble. So we should make a deal with China. Apparently you haven't heard about that.
I know, I haven't. But there will always be give and take in any relationship. And I'll get back to where I started. And that is, what are the assets of the United States and what are the assets of Taiwan? They're very clear. People and values. Doesn't matter what you do politically on the outside, so long as you can maximize the two greatest strengths that any country can have. Human capacity and values that now allow those people to maximize their talents and abilities and creativity. You've got what it takes. And I think those who share values will always be comparing notes and always be trading and always be investing and always be exchanging people on a friendly basis, because we share too much in common. So I hear the talk, but I also understand that there's an underlying strength that has held us together as people that is very real. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. I'm afraid I have to wrap up this event. Time is running out, actually. Governor and Mary Kay have a lunch to go to, and we ought to give them some time to rest a bit. And I'd like to thank Governor again for this excellent speech, very insightful, very comprehensive, and very inspiring. I learned a great deal, and I especially appreciate your candidness, the way you address all these questions. Some are really tough, some are That's on my point of view.
Thank you, Dr.
And
Suchi.
thank you for your sharing your thoughts with your old friends in Taiwan, and we would like to welcome you again soon, hopefully in the near future. And so we can hear more from you about your thoughts. Thank you very much. 谢谢大家。Thank you very much.